Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey through the most scandalous love affairs in royal history. Affairs so explosive they nearly toppled entire empires. What if I told you that in 1936, one phone call between lovers came within hours of completely destroying the British Empire? A secret so dangerous that it made Hitler himself change his invasion plans. And here's the crazy part. It all started with a woman who wasn't even sure she wanted to marry the man willing to give up everything for her. Tonight, we're diving into the ultimate royal scandal that shocked the world. But first, let me ask you something that will blow your mind by the end of this story. You know how we always say love conquers all? Well, what happens when love literally conquers too much? What happens when passion becomes so powerful it threatens to unravel 1,000 years of history? Because that's exactly what happened when King Edward VII met Wallis Simpson. And trust me, this love story is nothing like the fairy tales you grew up with. Before we dive into this incredible tale together, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, but only if you're truly enjoying what we're exploring together. I'm genuinely curious. Where are you listening to this right now? Your bedroom? Maybe on a late-night drive? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every single one and love connecting with fellow history lovers. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable, and let's uncover the love story that almost brought down a 1,000-year-old monarchy. Picture this. December 1936, London. The British Empire stretches across a quarter of the globe. King Edward VI sits on the throne, beloved by his people. Charming, modern, everything a king should be. But behind the palace walls, a secret burns so intensely, it's about to tear apart everything the crown represents. Because Edward isn't just in love. He's obsessively, desperately, completely consumed by a twice-divorced American woman named Wallis Simpson. Now, you might think, so what? Kings have had mistresses for centuries. But here's where this story gets absolutely wild. Edward isn't content to keep Wallis as a secret lover. He wants to marry her. He wants to make this American divorce his queen. And in 1936 Britain, that's not just scandalous, it's constitutional suicide. But wait, before I tell you how their love affair almost triggered a revolution, let me share something that will change how you see this entire story. What if everything you think you know about their great romance is wrong? Let me paint you the picture of how this all began. It's 1931 and Edward is still Prince of Wales. The golden boy of the royal family. He's at a party because of course this story starts at a party when he meets Wallis Simpson. She's married to Ernest Simpson, a British-American businessman, but there's something about her that completely captivates the future king. Wallis isn't traditionally beautiful by 1930s standards. She's angular, sharp-featured with a wit that cuts like a knife. But she has something that the proper English roses of Edward's usual circle lack. She treats him like a man, not a future king. She challenges him, argues with him, even makes fun of him. And Edward, who spent his entire life being told, "Yes, your highness," is absolutely smitten. Their affair begins quietly. Secret meetings, coded letters, carefully orchestrated encounters. But Edward isn't exactly subtle about his infatuation. He showers Wallis with jewelry that could fund a small country. We're talking about emeralds the size of robin's eggs, diamonds that once belonged to Indian Maharajas. The press starts to whisper. The government starts to worry. But here's what makes this story so fascinating and so dangerous. Wallis Simpson isn't some naive socialite swept off her feet by royal attention. She's calculating, ambitious, and she knows exactly what game she's playing. In her private letters, which historians discover decades later, she writes to her aunt about Edward. "I shall try to do my best to make him happy, though I must confess I find him rather simple in many ways." Simple. She called the future King of England simple. And maybe she was right, because Edward was about to make the most catastrophically simple decision in British royal history. By 1935, their relationship is the worst-kept secret in London high society. Edward is spending more time at Wallis's dinner parties than at official royal functions. He's asking her opinion on state matters. He's even bringing her on what should be private royal holidays. The Archbishop of Canterbury is horrified. The Prime Minister is having sleepless nights. And across the Atlantic, American newspapers are having a field day with headlines like the King's American Girlfriend. But the British press, they're completely silent. There's a gentleman's agreement, a media blackout that seems impossible to imagine in our age of TMZ and Twitter. The British public has no idea their king is in love with an American divorce. They don't know that their monarchy is teetering on the edge of collapse because of love letters and midnight phone calls. Then comes 1936 and everything changes. Edward's father, King George V, dies, and suddenly our romantic hero becomes King Edward VIII. Now, the affair isn't just scandalous gossip. It's a constitutional crisis because Wallis Simpson has just divorced her second husband and she wants to marry the King of England. But here's the question that will keep you thinking long after this story ends. Did Wallis Simpson actually want to become queen? Or was she trapped in a royal obsession she never asked for? The problem? The Church of England, which the king heads, doesn't recognize divorce. A divorced woman cannot become queen. It's not just tradition. It's religious law, constitutional law, the very foundation of the monarchy. Parliament makes it clear. Choose the throne or choose the woman. You cannot have both. And here's where Edward makes a decision that will echo through history. On December 11, 1936, in a radio broadcast heard around the world, King Edward VII speaks directly to his people. I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. With those words, he becomes the first British monarch in history to voluntarily abdicate the throne for love, for Wallis Simpson, for a woman who, in her private moments, wasn't even sure she wanted to marry him. The aftermath is swift and brutal. Edward becomes the Duke of Windsor, essentially exiled from Britain. His younger brother, George, becomes King George V. Yes, the same king whose struggle with stuttering was immortalized in the King's Speech. The royal family cuts Edward off almost completely. The woman he gave up everything for. Well, that's a story of its own complexity. What makes this tale so gripping isn't just the romance. It's the sheer audacity of it all. In an age when duty was everything, when the crown was considered sacred, one man chose love over empire. Whether that makes him romantic or selfish, well, that's for you to decide. But imagine the weight of that choice. Edward gave up ruling over 500 million people, commanding the world's largest navy, living in palaces that had housed kings for 1,000 years. All for a woman who once described him as simple in her private correspondence. The ripple effects of this decision shaped modern history in ways we're still discovering. If Edward had remained king, would Britain have been prepared for World War II? Would the steady leadership of George and the inspiration of the future Queen Elizabeth II have emerged? Sometimes the most personal decisions create the most profound historical consequences. And here's something that will absolutely amaze you as we continue tonight's journey. Edward and Wallis's story was just the beginning. Because when it comes to love affairs that nearly destroyed kingdoms, they were actually playing in the minor leagues. Coming up next, we're traveling back over 2,000 years to meet a woman who didn't just choose between love and power. She used love as the ultimate weapon of war. Cleopatra's strategic seductions didn't just capture hearts. They conquered the greatest empire the world had ever known. And the way she played Julius Caesar and Mark Antony against each other. It's a masterclass in power, passion, and political genius that makes modern dating look like child's play. Now, if you thought Edward of Earth's love story was dramatic, buckle up, because we're about to meet the ultimate queen of strategic seduction. We're going back over 2,000 years to ancient Egypt, where a woman didn't just fall in love with power, she wielded love as her most deadly weapon. Cleopatra VII didn't just seduce men. She conquered the Roman Empire one heart at a time. And the way she played the world's most powerful leaders, it's absolutely mind-blowing. But here's what will shock you most about Cleopatra's story. Almost everything Hollywood taught you about her is completely wrong. Ready to have your mind blown? Picture this. It's 48 BC Alexandria, Egypt. The greatest library in the ancient world burns in the distance. Civil war tears through the land of the pharaohs. And in the middle of this chaos, a 21-year-old queen is about to execute the most audacious seduction in human history. But Cleopatra isn't the exotic beauty Elizabeth Taylor portrayed. She's something far more dangerous. She's brilliant. Here's the thing that most people don't realize about Cleopatra. She wasn't even Egyptian. She was Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. For 3 centuries, her family, the Ptolemies, had ruled Egypt while barely speaking Egyptian. But Cleopatra, she spoke 9 languages fluently. 9. She was the first Ptoic ruler in 300 years to actually learn Egyptian and connect with her people. And physically, ancient coins show us she had a prominent nose, a strong chin, and what historians politely call unremarkable features. But here's what made her irresistible. Her voice. The ancient historian Plutarch wrote that her voice was like a musical instrument of many strings. She could convince anyone of anything. Simply by speaking to them. So when Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, arrives in Alexandria in 48 BC, Cleopatra knows she has one shot to save her kingdom. Her brother Tommy Thully has kicked her out of power, and she's basically a refugee queen with no army, no allies, and no hope, except she has her mind. What happens next is the stuff of legend. But here's the real story. Cleopatra has herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped in a carpet. Now imagine you're Julius Caesar. You're 52 years old. You've conquered Gaul. You've crossed the Rubicon. You literally invented the phrase, I came, I saw, I conquered. And suddenly out of a carpet rolls this young queen who starts speaking to you in perfect Latin about philosophy, mathematics, and military strategy. Caesar is absolutely captivated. But here's what's brilliant about Cleopatra's approach. She doesn't seduce Caesar with her beauty. She seduces him with her intellect. She discusses Egyptian infrastructure, Roman politics, trade routes through the Red Sea. She shows him that Egypt isn't just a prize to be won. It's a partnership that could make Rome even greater. And it works. Within days, Caesar is backing Cleopatra against her brother. Within months, they're lovers. Within a year, she's pregnant with his son, Caesarion. But here's the strategic genius of it all. Cleopatra doesn't just become Caesar's mistress. She becomes his advisor, his partner in reimagining what an empire could look like. Think about this for a moment. Caesar had conquered half the known world, but he'd never met a woman who could match his intellectual ambition. Cleopatra could discuss battle tactics in the morning and poetry in the evening. She could negotiate trade agreements and then debate philosophy under the stars. For a man used to being the smartest person in any room, finding an equal must have been intoxicating. Their relationship scandalized Rome. Roman wives were supposed to be modest, quiet, focused on household management. Cleopatra rode into Rome on a golden barge through lavish parties where she dissolved pearls in wine just to show off her wealth and openly influenced Caesar's political decisions. The Roman Senate was horrified. This foreign queen was making their great general look weak. But then on the Ides of March 44 BC, everything changes. Caesar is assassinated, stabbed 23 times on the Senate floor. Cleopatra, who's been living in Rome, suddenly finds herself completely alone in a city that hates her. She flees back to Egypt, but she knows her kingdom's fate now hangs by a thread. Here's where Cleopatra's story gets even more incredible. Most people would have given up, hidden in their palace, hoped for the best. Not Cleopatra. She immediately starts planning her next move because she knows something that will change everything. Rome's power is about to be split between three men, Octavian, Lepidus, and Mark Antony. And Cleopatra, she's about to set her sights on Mark Antony. Now, Mark Antony is nothing like Julius Caesar. Where Caesar was intellectual and calculating, Antony is passionate and impulsive. He's a warrior who loves wine, parties, and grand gestures. He's also devastatingly handsome, charismatic, and commands the loyalty of half the Roman army. If Cleopatra can win him over, Egypt survives. If she can't, well, Egypt becomes just another Roman province. So, in 41 BC, when Antony summons her to meet him in Tarsus, Cleopatra doesn't just show up. She creates a spectacle that's still talked about 2,000 years later. Picture this. She arrives on a golden barge with purple sails dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The air is thick with burning incense. Musicians play as she's fanned by boys dressed as cupids. The entire city of Tarsus lines the river banks to watch this floating paradise approach. But here's the genius part. While everyone is mesmerized by the spectacle, Cleopatra is studying Mark Antony, learning what makes him tick. And what she discovers is that unlike Caesar, who is motivated by legacy and empire, Antony is motivated by pleasure and recognition. He wants to feel like a god among men. So that's exactly what Cleopatra gives him. She throws banquets that cost more than most people see in a lifetime. She stages elaborate role-playing games where they dress as gods and goddesses. She makes him feel like the most magnificent person who ever lived. And just like with Caesar, it works perfectly. But Cleopatra's relationship with Antony goes deeper than just seduction and spectacle. They become true partners in reimagining what the Roman Empire could become. Antony starts adopting Egyptian customs, wearing Egyptian clothes, even minting coins with both their faces on them. They dream of creating an empire that blends the best of East and West, Greek philosophy with Egyptian wisdom, Roman efficiency with Eastern luxury. Here's something that will blow your mind. Cleopatra and Antony didn't just have a love affair. They had 3 children together and essentially created an alternative vision for the future of the Mediterranean world. If their plan had worked, we might be living in a very different world today. But while they're busy playing house and planning their empire, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, is quietly consolidating power in Rome. He's painting Antony as a traitor seduced by foreign witchcraft. He's turning Roman public opinion against this Egyptian queen who dares to influence Roman politics. The tension builds for years until it all comes to a head at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. This isn't just a naval battle. It's a clash between 2 completely different visions of what Rome should become. On one side, Octavian's traditional Roman values. On the other, Antony and Cleopatra's cosmopolitan fusion of cultures. And here's where Cleopatra makes the decision that changes everything. In the middle of the battle, seeing that they're losing, she orders her ships to retreat. Some historians say she fled in cowardice. Others argue she was making a strategic withdrawal to fight another day. But Antony, seeing her ships leaving, follows her. His fleet, thinking their commander has abandoned them, surrenders. The aftermath is swift and brutal. Octavian pursues them to Egypt. Antony, thinking Cleopatra is dead, falls on his sword. Cleopatra, realizing all is lost, chooses to die on her own terms. The famous snake bite. That's probably legend. Most historians think she used a poison cocktail that let her die peacefully and beautifully. But here's what makes Cleopatra's story so fascinating. She almost pulled it off. If Actium had gone differently, if she and Antony had won, the entire course of Western civilization would have changed. Instead of the Roman Empire, we might have had an Egyptian-Roman fusion that valued learning and culture as much as military might. Think about what Cleopatra actually accomplished. She kept Egypt independent for nearly 2 decades through sheer force of personality and strategic brilliance. She convinced 2 of the most powerful men in history to completely reimagine their ambitions. She came within one battle of reshaping the ancient world. And she did it all in an age when women had virtually no political power, when they were expected to be silent and obedient. Cleopatra refused to be either. She spoke 9 languages, patronized scholars, funded scientific research, and ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms on earth. She didn't just use love as a weapon. She used it as a tool of diplomacy, alliance building, and empire creation. What can we learn from Cleopatra's approach to love and power? Maybe that true seduction isn't about physical beauty. It's about becoming so fascinating, so intellectually stimulating, so genuinely exceptional that powerful people want to be around you. She made herself indispensable, not through manipulation, but through competence. I'm curious, what do you think would have happened if Cleopatra had won at Actium? Would the world be better today if her vision of a multicultural empire had succeeded? Drop your thoughts in the comments. But our journey through royal love affairs that nearly destroyed kingdoms is just getting started. Because while Cleopatra was using strategic seduction to preserve her ancient empire centuries later in France, another royal love scandal was brewing. One that would help trigger the most violent revolution in European history. Marie Antoinette's forbidden romances didn't just shock the court of Versailles. They became the spark that burned down the entire French monarchy. And the way rumors and whispers about her love life turned a nation against their queen. It's a cautionary tale about the power of public perception that feels remarkably relevant today. Speaking of love scandals that toppled empires. Let me tell you about a queen whose alleged affairs didn't just shock a nation, they literally helped fuel the bloodiest revolution in European history. Marie Antoinette's love life became such a weapon against the French monarchy that it turned an entire country into executioners. But here's the twist that will absolutely stun you. Most of the scandals that destroyed her reputation, they probably never even happened. What if I told you that fake news isn't a modern invention? That in 1780s France, propaganda about a queen's love affairs was so effective, it convinced millions of people to support chopping off her head. Welcome to the story of how rumors became revolution and how Marie Antoinette's alleged forbidden romances became the match that lit the fuse of the French Revolution. It's 1770 and a 14-year-old Austrian princess arrives at the French court with one job. Secure the alliance between Austria and France by marrying the future King Louis V XVI. Her name is Maria Antonia, but history will know her as Marie Antoinette. She's young, she's foreign, and she's about to become the most hated woman in France without really understanding why. Here's what makes Marie Antoinette's story so tragic and fascinating. She walked into a political trap that was set long before she ever set foot in France. The French people already resented Austria. They were suspicious of foreign influence and they were starting to grow tired of a monarchy that seemed increasingly out of touch with their suffering. But Marie Antoinette doesn't know any of this. She's a teenager who just wants to fit in, have fun, and maybe find some happiness in an arranged marriage to a boy who, let's be honest, is about as exciting as watching paint dry. Louis V XVI is awkward, obsessed with locks and hunting, and so socially uncomfortable that their marriage isn't consummated for 7 years. 7 years. Imagine being a young woman stuck in a loveless, physically unfulfilling marriage while the entire court watches and whispers about your every move. So, Marie Antoinette does what any lonely young person might do. She starts looking for friendship, excitement, and emotional connection elsewhere. And this is where the rumors begin to spiral completely out of control. Her first major scandal involves the Swedish Count Axel von Fersen. Now fun is everything Louis V XVI isn't. Tall, handsome, sophisticated, emotionally available. He becomes Marie Antoinette's closest confidant and probably the love of her life. But here's what's fascinating about their relationship. We have hundreds of their letters. And while they're deeply affectionate, there's no concrete evidence they were ever physically intimate. But facts don't matter when you're dealing with palace intrigue and public perception. The French court starts whispering. The rumors spread to Paris. And suddenly, Marie Antoinette isn't just an Austrian princess. She's Lutrison, the Austrian who's betraying France with foreign lovers. Then comes the scandal that really sets everything ablaze. The Diamond Necklace Affair of 1785. Now this story is so wild it reads like a soap opera script. A con artist named Jean de Lamont convinces a cardinal that Marie Antoinette wants to secretly buy a diamond necklace worth 1.6 million LRA. That's about $15 million in today's money. The cardinal, hoping to win the Queen's favor, arranges the purchase. The con artist steals the necklace, flees to England, and when the whole scheme collapses, guess who gets blamed? Marie Antoinette had absolutely nothing to do with this scam. She didn't even know it was happening. But when the story breaks, the French public doesn't care about facts. They see a foreign queen living in luxury while they can barely afford bread, and they assume she must be guilty. The pamphlets and songs mocking her spread like wildfire. She becomes the symbol of everything wrong with the monarchy. But here's where the story gets really dark. As France's financial crisis deepens in the 1780s, the attacks on Marie Antoinette become increasingly vicious and sexual. Pornographic pamphlets start circulating depicting her in graphic sexual situations with everyone from Count Fun to her own female friends. These aren't just political attacks. They're character assassinations designed to destroy her credibility as a queen and as a woman. The most damaging rumors suggest she's having affairs with multiple men and women. That she's bankrupting France to fund her lovers' lifestyles, that she's even plotting with Austria to undermine French interests. None of these accusations have solid evidence behind them, but they spread through Paris like a virus. Here's what's particularly cruel about this propaganda campaign. Marie Antoinette's real personality was almost the opposite of how she was portrayed. Yes, she was extravagant and sometimes tone-deaf about poverty, but she was also a devoted mother who spent hours playing with her children, a patron of the arts who supported French culture and a woman who genuinely tried to help French charities and causes. But perception became reality. By the late 1780s, when France was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy and revolution, Marie Antoinette had become the perfect scapegoat. Every economic problem, every political failure, every social injustice could somehow be blamed on the foreign queen and her alleged moral corruption. When the French Revolution finally explodes in 1789, the attacks on Marie Antoinette reach new levels of viciousness. Revolutionary newspapers published daily stories about her supposed affairs, her alleged plots against the revolution, her rumored attempts to call in foreign armies to crush the rebellion. The fact that most of these stories are complete fabrications doesn't matter. They serve their purpose of turning public opinion against the monarchy. Here's something that will give you chills. In the months before her execution, Marie Antoinette was kept in a tiny damp cell where she was watched 24 hours a day by guards who were specifically chosen for their hatred of the aristocracy. She wasn't allowed privacy to use the bathroom. She wasn't allowed to change clothes without being watched. It was psychological torture designed to break her spirit before they killed her. And yet, even facing death, Marie Antoinette maintained her dignity. On October 16, 1793, as she was led to the guillotine, she accidentally stepped on her executioner's foot and apologized. Think about that. Facing execution, she still had the grace to apologize for a minor accident. But here's the question that should haunt us. How much of Marie Antoinette's downfall was actually due to her actions? And how much was due to a deliberate propaganda campaign that used sexual scandal to destroy a political target? The parallels to modern politics are absolutely chilling. We live in an age where rumors spread instantly across social media, where fake news can destroy reputations overnight, where sexual scandal is still used as a weapon against political figures. Marie Antoinette's story is a cautionary tale about how dangerous it can be when public opinion is manipulated by those with political agendas. What's particularly tragic is that by the time Marie Antoinette was executed, France was already descending into the Reign of Terror. The revolution that was supposed to bring freedom and equality was devouring its own children. Thousands of people were executed on flimsy charges. The very people who had cheered Marie Antoinette's death would soon find themselves facing the same guillotine. Was Marie perfect? Absolutely not. She was privileged, sometimes insensitive, and definitely made political mistakes. But did she deserve to die for alleged affairs that probably never happened? Did rumors about her love life justify the destruction of an entire monarchy? These are questions worth pondering as we watch modern political scandals unfold. How easily can we be manipulated by stories about public figures' private lives? How often do we let personal gossip overshadow more important political issues? Think about how different history might have been if Maria Antoinette had been judged on her actual actions rather than on malicious rumors. Maybe the French Revolution would have taken a different path. Maybe thousands of lives could have been saved. Maybe we'd have learned to separate personal scandal from political governance centuries earlier than we actually did. I'd love to know what you think. Do you believe personal scandals should affect how we judge political leaders, or should we focus purely on their policies and actions? Share your thoughts below. The destruction of Marie Antoinette through scandal and rumor was devastating. But it wasn't the first time a royal love life had triggered massive political upheaval. In fact, if we journey back a few centuries to England, we'll discover a king whose romantic obsessions didn't just threaten one monarchy. They literally rewrote the religious map of Europe. Henry VIII's deadly dating game makes Marie Antoinette's troubles look like a minor scandal. We're talking about a man who created an entirely new church just so he could divorce his wife, who executed 2 queens for alleged adultery, and whose 6 marriages triggered religious wars that lasted for centuries. The body count from Henry's love life, it's absolutely staggering. When it comes to royal love scandals that reshaped entire civilizations, no one, and I mean no one, comes close to Henry VIII of England. This is the man who literally broke Christianity in half because he wanted a divorce. Who created his own church so he could remarry, who executed 2 of his 6 wives for alleged adultery. Henry's dating life was so catastrophic it triggered religious wars that lasted for centuries and left a body count that's absolutely staggering. But here's what will shock you about Henry VIII. He started as one of Europe's most eligible bachelors, a Renaissance prince who wrote love poetry and was considered the catch of his generation. So, how did this romantic young king become history's most deadly husband? And why did his desperate search for true love end up destroying more lives than most wars? Let's start at the beginning. Because Henry's transformation from charming prince to wife-killing tyrant is one of the most disturbing character arcs in royal history. When Henry becomes king in 1509, he's 17 years old, 6 foot tall in an age when most men are barely 5.5 ft, athletic, intelligent, and devastatingly handsome. He speaks 4 languages, composes music, writes poetry, and is basically the ultimate Renaissance man. European princesses are literally fighting over who gets to marry him. But there's one problem. Henry is already married to Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow, in a marriage that was arranged for political reasons when he was just 11 years old. Now, Catherine is actually perfect queen material. She's intelligent, devout, politically savvy, and genuinely loves Henry. But she has one fatal flaw in Henry's eyes. After 6 pregnancies, she's only given him one surviving child, a daughter named Mary. And here's where Henry's obsession begins to consume him. In the 16th century, kings need male heirs. Without a son, Henry believes England will descend into civil war after his death. He's probably right. England has barely recovered from the Wars of the Roses, where different branches of the royal family slaughtered each other for 30 years over succession disputes. So, Henry starts to convince himself that God is punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. Even though he needed a special papal dispensation to do it in the first place. He becomes obsessed with finding a way out of his marriage, and that's when he meets Anne Boleyn. Now Anne Boleyn is nothing like the typical royal mistress. She's not particularly beautiful by Tudor standards. She's got dark hair in an age that prefers blondes, a prominent mole on her neck, and what her enemies describe as a long neck like a crane. But Anne has something that drives Henry absolutely wild. She refuses to sleep with him. Think about this. Henry is the most powerful man in England. He's used to getting whatever he wants instantly. And this young woman just says no. Not only does she say no, she insists that if he wants her, he has to marry her. She wants to be queen or nothing. This creates a psychological dynamic that's absolutely fascinating. Henry, who's never been denied anything in his life, becomes completely obsessed with the one woman he can't have. He writes her 17 love letters that still survive today. Listen to this excerpt. I beseech you to advertise me expressly of your whole mind as to the love between us two. This is the King of England basically begging for attention from a woman who's playing hard to get. But Anne's demand for marriage creates an impossible problem. Henry can't divorce Catherine because the Pope won't allow it. The Catholic Church doesn't recognize divorce. And Catherine is the aunt of Charles the Holy Roman Emperor, who's basically the Pope's military protector. So the Pope is caught between theology and politics. And he decides to stall. For 6 years, Henry wages a diplomatic war trying to get his marriage annulled. He sends ambassadors to Rome. He bribes cardinals. He even threatens military action. Nothing works. And all this time, and Berlin is refusing to consummate their relationship, keeping Henry in a state of romantic and sexual frustration that's driving him literally insane. Finally, in 1533, Henry does something that changes the course of world history. He breaks with Rome entirely. He declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England, makes his own Archbishop of Canterbury, and grants himself a divorce. Just like that, he's created the Anglican Church, and shattered the unity of Western Christianity. The human cost of this decision is absolutely staggering. Henry executes anyone who opposes his break with Rome, including his former best friend, Thomas More, who was one of the most brilliant men in Europe. We're talking about thousands of people who died because Henry wanted to remarry. But here's the twisted irony. Once Henry finally marries in Berlin, the passion dies almost immediately. She gets pregnant right away, but she gives birth to a daughter, the future Elizabeth. Henry is furious. He wanted a son and he's convinced himself that Anne somehow tricked him into this marriage. Anne's downfall is swift and brutal. When she miscarries a son in 1536, Henry decides she's cursed. Worse, he's already spotted his next target, Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. So Henry does what he's becoming famous for. He manufactures evidence that Anne has committed adultery with multiple men, including her own brother. The charges are almost certainly false. The timeline doesn't work. The witnesses are coerced, and the supposed confessions are extracted under torture. But Henry doesn't care about evidence. He wants Anne gone so he can marry Jane. And that's exactly what happens. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn is beheaded on Tower Green. Henry marries Jane Seymour 11 days later. Jane finally gives Henry what he's desperate for, a son, the future Edward VI. But she dies 12 days after giving birth, probably from postnatal complications. Henry is devastated. He genuinely loved Jane and he'll be buried next to her when he dies. But his grief doesn't stop his marriage spree. Wife number 4 is Anne of Cleves, chosen from a portrait that turns out to be wildly flattering. When Henry meets her in person, he's so disgusted he calls her the Flanders mare and has the marriage annulled after 6 months. Poor Anne is probably relieved. She's gotten the best deal of any of Henry's wives by surviving with her head attached. Wife number 5, Catherine Howard, is barely 20 when she marries the now obese, diseased, and psychologically unstable Henry. She's young, flirty, and probably doesn't understand the deadly game she's playing. When evidence emerges that she had relationships before her marriage to Henry, and possibly an affair during it, Henry goes ballistic. Catherine Howard is executed in 1542, and this time Henry doesn't even attend the trial. By now, Henry's romantic obsessions have literally changed the DNA of European politics. England has broken with Rome, triggering religious wars that will last for centuries. Protestant and Catholic nations are choosing sides based partly on their relationship with Henry's marriages. The Counter-Reformation is partly a response to Henry's theological rebellion and the personal cost. Henry has executed 2 wives, divorced 2 others, and been widowed once. Thousands of people have died in religious upheavals caused by his marital decisions. He's terrorized his own children. Mary barely survives being declared illegitimate. Elizabeth grows up knowing her father killed her mother. And Edward inherits a kingdom torn apart by religious conflict. Wife number 6, Catherine Parr, survives only because she's smart enough to be submissive. And because Henry dies before he can find another reason to start the divorce process again. By the end of his life, Henry is a paranoid, bloated tyrant who weighs over 300 pounds and has legs so ulcerated they can smell them from across the room. But here's what's truly terrifying about Henry's story. It shows how quickly personal obsession can become political catastrophe when you have absolute power. Henry's desperate search for love and male heirs didn't just destroy his wives. It fractured Christianity, triggered centuries of religious warfare, and set the stage for conflicts that would eventually reach the New World. Think about the butterfly effect of Henry's marriages. If he'd been content with Catherine of Aragon, England might have remained Catholic. The Mayflower might never have sailed to America. The entire religious landscape of the Western world would be different. What do you think? Was Henry a romantic figure destroyed by circumstances, or was he always a monster waiting for the right opportunity to emerge? I'm genuinely curious about your take on this. Henry's deadly dating game proves that when love and absolute power collide, the results can be absolutely catastrophic. But Henry's marital chaos was just one example of how personal obsessions can destroy kingdoms. In our next tale, we're traveling to Imperial Russia, where another royal's twisted relationship with a mysterious mystic didn't just scandalize the court. It helped bring down an empire that had ruled for 3 centuries. The story of Rasputin and the Romanov family is so dark and bizarre that if you saw it in a movie, you'd think it was too outrageous to be true. But every shocking detail actually happened. From Henry VIII's deadly marriages, we leap forward to Imperial Russia, where a love affair so twisted and bizarre unfolded that it reads like something from a horror novel, except every shocking detail actually happened. This is the story of Gregory Rasputin, a filthy peasant mystic who seduced his way into the heart of the Russian royal family and helped destroy a 300-year-old empire. But here's the part that will blow your mind. Rasputin's power didn't come from black magic or supernatural abilities. It came from something far more dangerous and mundane. What if I told you that the downfall of the mighty Romanov dynasty wasn't caused by revolution or war, but by a mother's desperate love for her sick child? That one of history's most powerful empires collapsed because a peasant from Siberia convinced an empress he could save her son's life. The Rasputin scandal is proof that sometimes the most intimate family secrets become the deadliest political weapons. Let's set the scene. It's 1905 St. Petersburg, the glittering capital of Imperial Russia. Tsar Nicholas II rules over 1/16 of the world's land surface and 130 million subjects. His wife Alexandra is a German princess who converted to Russian Orthodoxy for love. They seem to have everything. Wealth, power, 4 beautiful daughters. But there's one problem that's tearing their family apart. Their son and heir, Alexei, has hemophilia. Now, hemophilia in 1905 is essentially a death sentence. One small bump, one minor fall, and Alexei could bleed internally until he dies in agony. There's no treatment, no cure, no hope. Alexandra watches her precious boy suffer through bleeding episodes that can last for days, and she's slowly going insane with grief and desperation. Enter Gregory Rasputin, a self-proclaimed holy man from the backwoods of Siberia. Picture this. He's tall, gaunt, with wild hair and hypnotic blue eyes that seem to burn right through you. He smells terrible. His fingernails are black with dirt, and he has a reputation for drinking, fighting, and seducing women wherever he goes. He's basically everything the refined St. Petersburg court finds revolting. But Rasputin has one skill that makes him invaluable to the royal family. Somehow inexplicably, he can stop Alexis's bleeding episodes. We still don't know how he did it. Maybe it was hypnosis. Maybe he had some medical knowledge. Maybe it was just incredible timing and luck. But every time Alexei is near death, Rasputin shows up, prays over the boy, and the bleeding stops. You can imagine what this does to Alexandra's mind. This filthy peasant is the only person who can save her son. She becomes completely dependent on him. And Rasputin, being no fool, uses this dependency to gain unprecedented access to the royal family. But here's where the story gets really scandalous. Rasputin doesn't just heal Alexei. He starts inserting himself into palace politics, giving advice on military strategy, recommending government ministers, even influencing Russia's involvement in World War I. And the rumors about his relationship with Alexandra, they're absolutely explosive. The gossip spreading through St. Petersburg is that Rasputin and Alexandra are lovers, that this peasant is sexually dominating the Empress of Russia. The stories get more and more graphic. They say Rasputin has hypnotized Alexandra, that he's performing dark rituals in the palace, that he's the real power behind the throne. Now, here's the fascinating part. There's almost no evidence that Alexandra and Rasputin ever had a physical affair. Their letters, which are found after the revolution, are intimate, but not sexual. They're the desperate communications. Government ministers are plotting against each other based on their relationship with the mystic. The entire structure of Imperial Russian government is being warped by one man's supposed sexual hold over the Empress. But Alexandra can't give up Rasputin because she genuinely believes he's the only thing keeping her son alive. Every time Alexei has a bleeding episode, she calls for Rasputin. Every time he recovers, her faith in the mystic grows stronger. She's trapped in a psychological prison of her own making. The situation becomes so dangerous that even members of the royal family start plotting against Rasputin. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in Russia, decides that Rasputin has to die. And the murder plot he hatches is absolutely wild. On December 29, 1916, Yusupov invites Rasputin to his palace for a late-night meeting. He feeds him cakes and wine laced with enough cyanide to kill 5 men. Rasputin eats everything and seems completely unaffected. Panicking, Yusupov shoots him in the chest. Rasputin collapses, apparently dead. But then, as Yusupov is celebrating with his co-conspirators, Rasputin's eyes snap open. He lunges at Yusupov, trying to strangle him, then staggers outside into the snow. The conspirators chase him down and shoot him 3 more times. They beat him with clubs, then throw his body into the frozen Neva River. When they find the body 3 days later, there's water in Rasputin's lungs, meaning he was still alive when he hit the water. This man survived poisoning, multiple gunshots, a beating, and nearly drowned in an icy river. No wonder people thought he had supernatural powers. But here's the tragic irony. Killing Rasputin didn't save the monarchy. It might have actually hastened its destruction. Alexandra was so grief-stricken by Rasputin's murder that she withdrew even further from public life. The royal family became even more isolated and paranoid. And the Russian people, instead of celebrating Rasputin's death, started to see it as proof that the nobility was completely out of control. Within 2 months of Rasputin's murder, revolution broke out in St. Petersburg. Within a year, the entire Romanov family was dead, executed in a basement in Edinburgh. The 300-year-old dynasty that had ruled one of the world's greatest empires was wiped out. And it all started with rumors about a peasant mystic's relationship with the desperate mother. What's so haunting about the Rasputin affair is how it shows the power of perception over reality and politics. Alexandra probably never had a sexual relationship with Rasputin, but the belief that she did was enough to destroy her family's legitimacy. In our age of social media and instant global communication, this story feels remarkably relevant. Think about how conspiracy theories spread today. How political figures can be destroyed by rumors and innuendo. How the appearance of scandal can be more damaging than actual wrongdoing. Rasputin's story is a cautionary tale about how quickly public trust can evaporate when people believe their leaders are compromised. Here's a question for you. Do you think Alexandra could have saved her family by giving up Rasputin? Or was the Russian monarchy doomed regardless of what she did? I'm curious about your thoughts on whether personal loyalty should ever override political necessity. The fall of the Romanov shows us how dangerous it can be when royal families become isolated from their people's reality. But isolation wasn't always a weakness for monarchs. Sometimes strategic distance and mysterious allure could be the key to maintaining power. Our next story takes us to Elizabeth and England, where a queen turned her refusal to marry into the most effective political weapon in European history. Elizabeth didn't just avoid romantic scandals. She weaponized romance itself, using the promise of marriage to manipulate kings and emperors across Europe. Her love-life politics were so brilliant they helped England become a global superpower. While Rasputin's scandal destroyed the Romanovs through rumors and whispers across Europe centuries earlier, another monarch was doing something absolutely revolutionary. She was turning romance itself into the ultimate political weapon. Elizabeth II of England didn't just avoid the romantic scandals that destroyed other royal families. She weaponized the very idea of marriage, using it to manipulate kings and emperors across Europe while building England into a global superpower. This is the story of how the Virgin Queen used love as warfare. But here's the mind-blowing twist that changes everything we think we know about Elizabeth. She probably wasn't actually a virgin at all. The woman who built her entire political identity around remaining unmarried likely had passionate love affairs that were so skillfully hidden they've remained secret for over 400 years. So, how did she pull off this incredible deception? And why did she choose political power over personal happiness? Step into England in 1558. Elizabeth is 25 years old and has just become queen of a small, relatively poor island nation that's torn apart by religious conflict. Spain controls most of the New World. France dominates continental Europe and the Ottoman Empire threatens from the east. England is basically a minor player on the European stage, and everyone expects this young queen to quickly marry a powerful foreign prince to secure protection for her vulnerable kingdom. But Elizabeth has other plans. She's watched what happened to her sister Mary, who married Philip II of Spain and became essentially a puppet ruler in her own country. She's seen how marriage turned powerful queens into political pawns, and she's determined not to make the same mistake. So, Elizabeth does something absolutely brilliant. She promises everyone everything while giving no one anything. She begins the most elaborate romantic chess game in European history, simultaneously courting multiple suitors while never actually committing to any of them. Her first major romantic manipulation involves Eric XIV of Sweden. Elizabeth spends 3 years flirting with the idea of marrying him, sending gifts, writing affectionate letters, even allowing Swedish ambassadors to believe an engagement is imminent. Meanwhile, she's using the threat of an English-Swedish alliance to terrify Philip II of Spain into offering her better trade deals. But the real masterpiece of Elizabeth's romantic strategy involves the Archduke Charles of Austria. For over a decade, Elizabeth strings along the Habsburgs with the possibility of this marriage. She negotiates dowries, discusses wedding dates, even haggles over whether Charles would be allowed to hear Catholic Mass in private. The Austrians are so convinced she's serious that they spend fortunes on embassy missions and diplomatic gifts. The whole time, Elizabeth has absolutely no intention of marrying Charles. She's using the marriage negotiations to prevent Austria from allying with France against England, while also keeping Spain from becoming too aggressive. It's diplomatic genius disguised as romantic indecision. But Elizabeth's most dangerous game involves Philip II of Spain himself. Now Philip is the most powerful man in Europe. He controls Spain, the Netherlands, much of Italy, and vast territories in the Americas. He's also Elizabeth's former brother-in-law, having been married to her sister Mary, and he's getting increasingly frustrated with England's Protestant policies and support for Dutch rebels. So, when Philip starts making threatening noises about invading England, Elizabeth pulls out her most audacious move. She starts flirting with him. She sends him affectionate messages, hints that she might consider converting to Catholicism, even suggests that marriage between them might heal the religious divisions in Europe. Philip, who's dealing with rebellions across his empire and desperately needs England as an ally rather than an enemy, takes the bait completely. He delays his invasion plans, hoping that marriage might give him control over England without the cost and risk of war. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is using the time Philip gives her to build up England's navy, forge alliances with other Protestant nations, and prepare for the inevitable conflict. She's literally seducing Philip into giving her the time she needs to defend against him. But the most fascinating aspect of Elizabeth's romantic strategy involves her relationship with Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. This is the love of Elizabeth's life, her childhood friend, a man so handsome and charming that the entire court is convinced she'll eventually marry him. Their relationship is so intense that foreign ambassadors report they seem like lovers whenever they're together. The problem? Dudley's already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lives quietly in the countryside while her husband plays romantic games at court with the Queen.